Language serves not only to express thought, but to make possible thoughts which could not exist without it. Bertrand Russell. It's time for science, and it's time to talk about English language development and translanguaging. With us are Deanna Vélez and Claudio Vargas to chat about ELD in the classroom and discuss their work on translanguaging. Deanna Vélez is a curriculum developer and professional learning provider for the Full Option Science System project, FOSS, at the Lawrence Hall of Science. She specializes in English language development and the integration of literacy in science teaching and learning. Claudio Vargas is an educational consultant with Sci-Lingual Education and FOSS at the Lawrence Hall of Science. He delivers keynote presentations on equity in STEM and creates professional learning experiences for science educators. We discuss what exactly is translanguaging and talk about working towards having the mindset that all resources students bring in are assets, including different languages. We discuss expanding the idea of bringing in prior knowledge to include bringing in understanding in different languages and letting students use everything they bring to a classroom to enhance the learning experience. Stick around at the end because producer David Lippman also reviews the game Trails from Keymaster Games with an eye out and an ear open for the multilingual classroom. It's time for science, and it is time to talk about translanguaging in the science classroom. With us today are Deanna Vélez and Claudio Vargas. We're going to talk about what translanguaging is all about, why it's important, and how to use it effectively in your classroom. Deanna Vélez taught bilingual first grade at Oakland USD and is currently a curriculum and equity specialist at the Lawrence Hall of Science at UC Berkeley. Claudio Vargas taught as a bilingual K-5 teacher, coordinated the K-12 science programs at Oakland USD, and directed the Bay Area Science Project at UC Berkeley's Lawrence Hall of Science. He's currently an educational consultant with Sci-Lingual Education and a California Association of Science Educators board member. So, Deanna and Claudio, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I should say welcome back to the show because we've had you on before because you're the experts. So I want to talk to you. Let's just start with the big picture. So, Deanna, let's talk about what is translanguaging. How do you explain it? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah. Well, just as a very basic level, it is both a way of communicating, the way naturally people who are multilingual go in and out of languages fluidly when speaking with others, especially that speak those other languages. But it's also now more and more used in the classroom as a pedagogy for being more intentional about the fact that students have come into the classrooms with other languages than English. So having that mindset of that's an asset that students are bringing, and let's use all of the different resources that students bring, including language, to the classroom. And mostly it's used in the sense-making process. That's where it becomes very valuable as a way for students to contribute what they know, but in their language. And so they're bringing to the whole classroom not only their experiences, but how they communicate those experiences.
So, Claudio, how do you feel about that? What is your view of translanguaging? How do you add to that?
What I'd like to add is that when we started doing this work, I had not realized that it had been going on for many, many years. It's about 40 years old at this point. And it started in the Welsh, Northern Welsh country, because there's two languages there, and the educational system wanted students to be able to use both languages, English and Welsh. So they didn't call it translanguaging at that time, but that's what it's called now. And it allows students to be able to keep their language, Welsh, at the same time learn the new language, which is English. And it's slowly been morphing from more of a strategy or pedagogy to looking at this kind of learning, translanguaging, as a linguistic approach to learning languages. And from there, in the sciences, it morphed into looking, as Diana just mentioned, having students use all their repertoire of knowledge of languages for sense making. And that's how it's been used today.
So, in an article that you wrote that we have linked to in the show notes below, we talk about you talk about the various levels or stages of how to do it. So, you start with prior knowledge. I want to talk a little bit about that. So, Deanna, can we start with that? What is that? Why is starting with prior knowledge important for teachers to understand?
Yeah, and I think I mentioned that earlier, that children don't come into a classroom as blank slates, and I think this is pretty much, most teachers understand this. And so we tend to ask them, well, what do they know about a subject, to activate that prior knowledge, because in order to connect new knowledge, we need to know where students are. But translanguaging adds on another, I think, layer of language. Traditionally, if we're teaching in English, we want students to be using that language, the language of instruction. But if we expand this idea of children bringing everything into the classroom, then we can ask them what their prior knowledge is about a subject and let them explain that in their primary language. And if that's not a language that others can understand, there's so many tools now for translating that, and that just becomes an opportunity for everyone to learn something new in a different language. And I don't know if for those that do speak another language, you definitely have a shift in the way you see things and feel things when you speak in a different language. There's just a connection that if you learned about something in one language, you have a certain emotion tied to that. And so that letting students use everything that they bring in, just enhances the learning experience for everyone.
I would assume, as a non-expert in this field, just the kids would feel more comfortable as well. They're already stressed about learning a new language, trying to fit in. But if you're asking them to describe something in their own language, that must make them feel really good about it.
Right. It's a way that they can connect their own lived experience, right, and culture to what they're learning in the classroom, because they have the vehicle, which is their language. The interesting thing is that there's an interesting quote that learning another language is not only learning different words for the same thing, but learning another way to think about things. So language and culture impact the way you perceive the world. And that's true in science as well as anything else.
Oh, I wanted to also respond to what you said, Tom, because I think that's so important, that what we call the affective filter for learning. So the fact, and I when I taught, I would see this if I'd go into a class. Actually, this is when I was a coach, and I would go into different classrooms. And if I went in there and then I started speaking Spanish, all of a sudden you could see, like, students make smile, and they make a connection, and that just tells students, yes, our language is valid. We belong here. We can use our language, just like we can use English, that they are both acceptable and valued. And so and that is so important for learning. Like you were just saying, like, if students feel like they belong, that they are of value, they have something to contribute, they are going to learn. They are going to be much more engaged in the learning, and be able to stay more focused.
That's like a key element of representation matters. They see it, they can be it, and I love that. I love that aspect of it.
I gave a session for graduate students at UC Berkeley last week. And one of the things I do is model a lesson in Spanish. And some students understand, some don't. And then I scaffold, et cetera, et cetera. And I just got a email yesterday from one of the students that said, the fact that you taught this lesson in my home language changed the way I looked at the relationship of power and gave me a different perspective on what it feels like when it's your language that's being used. So I thought that was very interesting because teaching and learning is a social relationship. And when one language is considered above another one or other ones, then there's a relationship of power.
One of the things that I think is interesting for teachers these days, your cell phone, you've got Google Translate, you have all these things that can help you in ways that weren't before. So that must make it much more accessible.
Yeah, that is huge. And I was going to mention that for teachers that aren't that don't speak the language of their students, that there's, like you were just saying, there's opportunities to, or there's technology, so you can use a translator. I was just reading how you can, even in your AirPods now, they'll translate in real time for you.
Yeah,
So
that's crazy.
So there's really just endless possibilities, and with AI and you name it, where you can learn a few words that you can say to your students or have students translate, or they're just all sorts of new opportunities for bringing multi languages into your classroom. So it doesn't have to be that you have to speak the language of your students, but I think it's more about this mindset of, here, I have all these language barriers and my kids don't have a language. And just shifting that to, wow, I have all these languages in my classroom. Wow, what can I learn? And how can, and by doing so, just by showing an interest in the language of your students is huge, because now they feel like, I have, what I have is valuable. It's not a barrier. It's a gift that I can share with others.
And you're learning from them. You're learning cool stuff from them and their culture. I think that's kids love that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Right.
That's
But
awesome.
like Diana's saying, it's a change of mindset of teachers as how they see their students, and to look at multilingualism as an asset, not a deficit, not a barrier to learning, but a way to use all your language repertoires to really learn.
The next section I was going to talk about is embracing translanguaging, but we're talking about it right now. Is there any other thing you want to add to that? How teachers can embrace translanguaging in their classroom?
Yeah, I was going to say that also, and Claudia was talking about the history. I know when I taught it in a bilingual classroom, the traditional way that, well, at the time it wasn't traditional, but it was you speak English when you're doing English instruction, you speak Spanish when you're doing Spanish instruction, you don't mix those. And what's different, and I think that's where translanguaging is now defined differently than bilingual, is that the research shows that actually isn't the only way. I mean, that's not as if, I don't know if it's not as effective, but letting students switch in and out of languages is actually beneficial for their learning of English or whatever the language of instruction is, and also for maintaining their language, and also for sense making. Because if you think about the cognitive activity you're doing, you're thinking, okay, I'm speaking one language, but now I've got the word for it in another language, and I can go in and out and use my languages to actually speak in more nuanced ways about things, because there's a word in Spanish that actually there isn't in English. So there's just more research to show that this is actually more beneficial than that. I'm a more structured English only, other language only, but actually embracing this. It's okay to go back and forth, and it's actually encouraged that the teacher model that, how you can go back and forth.
Claudia, you want to add to that?
Adding to that, Diana's talking about the research. When you think about languages, where they reside in your brain, all the languages are in the same portion of your brain, left temporal lobe, and they're all mixed. And it's not like a multilingual student or bilingual student has two different places where the language resides. A bilingual student is not two monolingual students. A bilingual student is somebody that has a mixture of languages that can go in and take the words and the concepts they need to use from that same area in your brain. So it's a very fluid process if you're allowed to do that. Now, the schools, many schools do not allow that, like Diana was saying. And this old concept of you have to keep languages separate. And when you're learning a new language, yes, you need some time to keep them separate to learn the new language. But in science, we're talking about sense making. And for that, you need to use all your repertoire,
Right.
everything you have.
You would feel limited by what I don't know. I can't say this, so I want to go to my own language, which makes sense, So, I want to talk about specific maybe strategies for using translanguaging, tips for teachers who want to use this. Do you let's run down some of those. What can you tell teachers who are 100% on board here? What kind of strategies do they have?
Well, I think I would start with just making sure, and I think this is the easiest way to. Step one is just making sure you have multiple language, or at least the language of your students. So if you're using a word wall, and you just make sure you have the words, also the words in the other languages present. Making sure you have glossaries. Anytime allowing students to translate the text that they may have, or if you're able to offer it in another language, just making sure that there are those other languages are fully accessible in all the ways that you're providing the instruction in English. Well, maybe not all the ways, but as much as makes sense, where you see opportunities. Like I said, if you already have words on the wall, or you have posters or things, visuals, making sure that they include the other languages. And that could even be something you can assign for students, depending on what age. Older students, that could be a task. Like, we have this model about the solar system. Would someone like to take this home or whatever as homework, and actually find the words for all of this in Mandarin or whatever language of students, and make a new poster or something like that. So just seeing things like this as opportunities for deeper learning for students.
Right. Something that is always a question that I hear is, should we let students use another language in the classroom, right, when they're learning, in this case, science? And I say yes. The most basic understanding of translanguaging and of language development is, yes, let your students use their preferred language for note-taking, for conversations in their groups. And then when needed, you can support that student to translate, right, to the language of instruction, which is not always English, by the way, right? There's a lot of classes where they're learning Spanish or Mandarin. But having students have the ability or the permission to use their home language is critical when we talk about language development, because that's their starting point.
Right.
Let's see, other things, presentations in the classroom. Say they're presenting their poster for their task, and encourage them to use their home language and have others in the group translate to the language of instruction. So value the language that is coming in, and at the same time make connections, right, to the language of instruction. And in science, there's this, and in all learning, there's this question of registers, right? There's different contexts in which you use a language. It could be an everyday use in the schoolyard, right? And then you shift to a discipline-specific language in the science classroom. And you can support that process in any language. It doesn't have to be just the language of instruction, because science concepts, doesn't matter what language you're using.
Hmm.
It's the concept that's important.
Yeah, I could add to. I actually was just reading an article about kind of this call to action about having translanguaging in informative assessment, and we can link that article as well. But it's this idea of if we are using translanguaging in the classroom as a pedagogy, then it falls that we should also be allowing that or encouraging that in our formative assessments, right? We wouldn't do all of these wonderful things, let students make models and use different languages and gestures, all of the repertoire that they have in order to show in order during the sense making, and then we should then allow those same sort of modalities in the formative assessment, right? Because that's what we really want. And it's not that we want to know where students are in their language development, although that might be another another goal, but it's where are they in their science understanding, and that can be shown in multiple ways. And so we should allow that to be in our formative assessment as well, so that it's more authentic. And I think what teachers are doing and what we're seeing examples of is just being very intentional with students about, hey, so you can this is when you do this say this task, it'll be in English and maybe another language. You can write about it, you can answer it in the language of your choice, and then this particular part right here, I want you to do it in English, right? So it's just honoring that maybe in the sense making students want to use their primary language, but maybe you want, because of course the reality is when they take standardized tests, they're probably going to be in English, and maybe there's a part of it that they want, but just allowing all those different ways for students to show what they know, and being intentional about that, I think is it's exciting to see that happening in the field.
Claudio, I know that you're going to be doing an example of this at CASE. I was wondering if you took a lesson or a FOSS lesson. Is there anything like how would you take a lesson and actually apply these things to it? What are some ideas for that?
We did a lesson last year or a session at CASE using the spoon gong, this activity, first grade activity from FOSS. And part of the lesson involves students talking in groups as they do their exploration. And of course, the prompt was you can talk in any language that you feel comfortable in and support that communication through drawings or models or graphs, whatever, or gestures if your partners do not speak the same language you are. So trying to establish communication in your preferred language. Second, we did a model in the front, what FOSS calls a class notebook, a short paper with a model of the spoon gong and how sound it travels through the string. And we asked participants to find or use the words for the different equipment and concepts in their home language and to put it in that model so other people could see it, learn from that, and not only learn the concepts, but learn a new language for that. And we had about 17 different languages represented in that session. Wow. And people were so open about saying that they felt so good being able to use their language from their home, right, to learn and to communicate. So that was a really nice output from that session. And next week we're doing one with a different subject.
I think it's great. I mean, even the people who speak English who don't know the language are learning that language. I mean, they're learning cool little things. I always love that. I love picking up just phrases and words, and they're learning as well. I think that's a wonderful thing.
Now, one thing, just to come back to the bigger picture of why we're doing this work, if we look at the world today, communication is so rapid, right? There's 194 countries, but there's over 71,000 languages that are named. In the US only by itself, it's over 350 languages. In California, we have about 200 different languages represented. And in the school system, the public school system, there's 40% of the students, of the 5 million students, speak a language other than English. So all our classrooms, right, are represented by students that speak other languages. And out of those, about 20% of our students here in California are language learners. So they are learning, in this case, mostly English, right? And this process of translanguaging supports that process of learning another language. At the same time, you're learning content. Because the idea of learning a different language is not just to learn a different language, to ask where is the bathroom kind of thing, but really to learn, right? To learn about the world, about concepts, etc. And Translanguaging supports that.
Well, I don't know if there's anything to top that statement right there. I think it's an amazing thing. Anything that helps kids learn is the best, but I think that making kids feel included is probably the number one thing that I learned from this podcast is, making them feel excited about it and to be able to communicate their ideas. And this is a huge, huge part of that. So I just want to thank you both for coming. Is there anything you want to wrap up with?
It brings together this idea of science, of content learning, in this case, science and language development. There's so much attention to how, getting kids to speak English, but this sort of way of looking at language as fluid and alive. And I love when we have these opportunities. And one of the things around that spoon gong activity was it was something simple like the spoon and the word for spoon in one language, and someone made a connection to it, in another language. And then there's this whole history of, well, where did that come from? Right? And so you get into meta linguistics, and you can do this with students. So it's really enriching their understanding of language, which is so important, right? So you're able to not just be able, like I was saying, speak another language for practical reasons, but to also just get into the history of language and how we communicate and where words come from is a whole other aspect of learning. I think that's exciting about it.
Yeah, I'm not a person I didn't pick up languages very well, but I love the study of words, all the etymology stuff. I follow all this stuff on YouTube, where words come from and what do they mean from different languages. It's fascinating. And I think it leads directly into culture, into art, like you said. You're just figuring something out about that. I love that. Claudio, do you want to wrap up? What do you got?
What do I have? So nowadays, we have to be aware that there is a push in this country for this notion of English only. And there's a lot of new executive orders being signed that makes English the only language in the educational system. And we have to counteract that. And teachers have to be part of that so they can act as facilitators of language development and concept development in the language that students want and need to use. So not just English only. And to understand that translanguaging is a strategy to learn and to make students feel welcome into the classroom. And it's not because there's a lack of proficiency in language.
I think that sums it up beautifully. Deanna and Claudio, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Hi there, producer David Littman here. I haven't reviewed any games in a bit, but after listening to Deanna and Claudio's interview, I started thinking about how games might be used in a multilingual classroom. Way back in episode 1, I reviewed Parks from Keymaster Games, which I still highly recommend. Keymaster Games also makes a super fun card game, Trails. I won't review gameplay here, see the notes for a link to a video in English on how to play, but one of the things that I really like about this game in this context, other than the theme of being out and appreciating nature, is that there are almost no words in any language on any of the game pieces and cards. In a multilingual classroom, there can be communication around playing the game that doesn't have to do with reading cards. But how to learn the rules if they're only available in English? While searching around, I did find fan-made instructions in Spanish and even a video in Spanish describing how to play. I didn't review these resources myself, so please make sure to take a look and listen before having your students use them. In addition, the official instruction video and other user-made instruction videos are available on popular streaming sites, some of which have auto-generated captions in multiple languages. Again, you'd want to review these resources before turning your kids loose, but there seem to be some great resources available for kids to learn the rules in their native tongue. And if the auto-generated captions don't all make sense, as they sometimes don't, or if some of your students are non- or emerging readers, maybe that's an opportunity for your students to work out the rules cooperatively before they begin to play. Some of the game review sites I came across also included descriptions on how much language was present on the game pieces and cards, so you can do some of your own initial sleuthing to find other games that might work well in your classroom. I'd say Trails is probably best suited for a 5th grade classroom or above. Keymaster Games may offer an educator's discount, so you can reach out to them at hello@keymastergames.com and they'll help you build your order. Thanks to Keymaster Games for providing us with a review copy of Trails. And thanks for listening to It's Time for Science.
It's Time for Science is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lipman and Tom Racine, and is sponsored by School Specialty and FOSS, the full option science system, at the Lawrence Hall of Science, UC Berkeley. Be sure to check out FOSS on Facebook and Instagram.